I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, the continuing discussion of the good and the bad of the Iran deal that President Obama worked out with the P5+1 and Iran, where they agreed to a formula whereby Iran would suspend much of its nuclear program for the next 10 to 15 years, and economic sanctions on Iran would be lifted, and it would result in billions of dollars coming into the Iranian economy. And as you know, there are those who are arguing good and bad about that deal. And for some more insight, I am so pleased to have on our phones from Washington, D.C., the Executive Director of the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, Robert Satloff. Robert, it's wonderful to be speaking to you again. Thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure to talk with you.
Thank you. So, Robert, first of all, your overall impressions. You've seen the debate that's raging in America. Which side do you come down on? Do you basically think this is a good deal? Are you basically concerned that the Obama administration has been taken advantage of?
Well, I'm still evaluating all aspects of the deal. There are certainly aspects of the deal that are beneficial to the United States, but there are many flaws in the deal, many complications, and I think in its broadest sense, the deal empowers America's adversary, Iran, at the expense of our partners. So this is very concerning, and so I have deep misgivings about the deal, and I'm still evaluating it in terms of its bottom line.
Okay, I want you to try to identify what concerns you most. And, you know, we have already spoken to Alan Solo, who everybody knows is a very close friend of the president, but he also is a deeply committed Jew who is passionate about the well-being of the State of Israel and about the United States of America.
Well, one doesn't have to have an although in there. It can be an and.
You're good for you. And is correct. And at the same time, he argues that what this deal does is put America in a far better position to monitor what Iran is doing, and ultimately over the next 10, 15 years, gain so much information that it will be less likely, not more likely than it is today, that Iran will ever develop a nuclear weapon itself or become a nuclear weaponized state. From your perspective, and again, you've seen the argument, most of the people who argue against it are saying that the best this deal does is delay Iran's getting a nuclear weapon. It does not prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. I want to know where you stand on that issue. Are we preventing or not?
Well, I have great respect for Alan for many good reasons. I do think he oversells the agreement, and I haven't heard his remarks. I'm just hearing them via you.
Yes.
But I do think an argument that suggests that this agreement prevents forever Iran's acquisition of a nuclear weapon certainly oversells the deal. I mean, even the president himself said in an NPR interview not too long ago that when the limitations on Iranian enrichment and other research and development expire, Iran will be very close to a nuclear weapon. I mean, I think we have to recognize that this deal leaves Iran ultimately as, at the very least, a nuclear threshold state.
Yes.
And so I think we should evaluate it on that basis, whether or not postponing the Iranian acquisition of a weapons capability for between 10 to 15 years is worth or not worth the price that the United States and its partners pay for that achievement. That I think is is one of the basic questions. It's not the only basic. It's not the only question.
I understand. I want to know.
All right, go ahead.
What's the price you feel we've paid? And as you talk about that, move into what are some of your specific concerns about this deal?
Well, look, on a strategic level, I think the price that we pay for this postponement of Iranian nuclear ambitions is that we bless, we don't only acquiesce, but we bless Iran's emergence as a major, I don't want to say dominant, but certainly a major Middle East power, a power with influence far beyond its borders. I mean, we already know that Iran is seeking such influence. It does this in all sorts of ways, working nefariously with Hezbollah, with radical Shiite militias, with all sorts of things. But this agreement, I characterize it as a blueprint for Iran's emergence as a major regional power.
Yes.
With the blessing of the United States and the international community. That, in a strategic sense, is the bargain. I'm very concerned about this bargain. Then there's another layer of concerns that I have about the agreement that have to do with the specifics, having to do with monitoring and verification, having to do with the what's called the snapback provision.
Yes.
Of reimposing sanctions.
Yes.
I think, if you want to get into the details, I'm happy to.
Yes.
But I think
let's take them one at a time. To what extent do you feel the verification process is good enough? And I've heard people very upset over the fact that in some instances, Iran has up to 24 days from the time it gets noticed to the time it has to really open up its facility. And Alan Solo's answer is, if you're doing nuclear work, you can't cover it up in 24 days. But in general, what bothers you about the verification process?
Again, there's nuclear work and then there's nuclear work. I don't want to have a sort of shadow debate with Alan.
Yes, I understand.
If one is fearful that Iran is hiding a massive underground enrichment facility with thousands of centrifuges and all the scientific equipment that goes with that, then that is correct. It is virtually impossible to scrub and hide such a facility in 3 weeks. Satellites will see you trucking out the centrifuges. You can't hide that.
Yep.
But there are many different types of violations and illicit activities that are on smaller scales that would be very problematic, that can occur in places that one could scrub in less than 24 days. Weaponization efforts, for example, do not require massive Walmart-sized facilities. These are relatively small laboratory-type facilities. There's all sorts of potential violations that Iran could indeed scrub in 24 days. And just to add one more twist to this, according to the terms of the agreement, when the inspectors make a request to visit a site, they not only make a request to say, we'd like to visit Building X, they have to provide the Iranians the specific rationale and documentation to support their request to visit Building X, which essentially means that we give the Iranians a specific heads up about what the inspectors are looking for. I don't have to one doesn't have to be a Sherlock Holmes to say that that's not the best way to try to discover some illicit activity by a perpetrator. So I think there is, I think there's legitimate concern about the nature of this agreement. By no stretch, the nature of the verification, by no stretch does it hit, for example, Secretary of Energy Moniz's commitment a couple of months ago that this would be anytime, anywhere.
Yes.
It is certainly anywhere. I give the negotiators credit. There are no places in Iran which are off limits to inspections. But the anytime part of that equation is not the case.
Okay. Robert, to any degree, is your opposition to this deal politically motivated?
Well, I certainly don't think so. I'm...
By the way, I know it isn't, but it's an important thing for the audience to understand. This isn't for you a partisan issue.
Look, others will make whatever judgment they wish to make. For me, I can only say that I'm the most nonpartisan person I've ever met.
Exactly. Okay. And so in that context, when you look at the support that the president is asking for with this deal, given all the concerns you have, and they seem very both rational and legitimate, how do you answer the question, why is the president and why are those who support this deal, what's motivating them? What don't they understand that you understand? And why are they as concerned as you are?
Look, I hope you don't mind me saying that I learned many years ago that I avoid questions about others' motivations. It's never a worthwhile discussion. I can only hazard that, and I think it's legitimate that the advocates of this deal believe that this is the best we could have achieved in order to get a substantial postponement of Iran's nuclear ambitions. My critique to that is, I believe we made a negotiation error in the sense that first we negotiated with ourselves. First we decided, what do we think the Iranians will accept? And that became essentially our opening position, maybe a little bit tougher to give us a little room to come down, but that essentially was our bargaining goal, what we believed the Iranians would accept. The Iranians had a very different approach. The Iranians had a set of baselines. They will not go beyond. And they stuck to them. They said from the beginning, we will start with our goal of maintaining an industrial nuclear program, and we will end with our goal of maintaining an industrial nuclear program. Or just if you want to take the issue of the number of centrifuges, again, this is where you sit determines where you stand. The Iranians have approximately 9,000 functioning centrifuges right now, 19,000 in total. The administration defines the success of the agreement that we have gotten the Iranians to accept to maintain only 1/3 of their total number of centrifuges. The Iranians can, of course, say that 2/3 of their functioning centrifuges are still active. And it really depends on how you want to spin the bottom line here.
Yes.
Now, I believe that we negotiated with ourselves. We decided early on that the standards set out in numerous Security Council resolutions, namely that Iran end enrichment, that Iran fully suspend its enrichment activities, that was a bridge too far. And we decided on our own, without even asking the Iranians, without even demanding this of the Iranians, we decided not to pursue that goal. Was that a reasonable judgment? Well, I don't want to. I have a view that's different than those people in the government on this issue. But I have yet to meet a senior U.S. government official who says that we tried and we tried and we tried again to get the Iranians to agree to implement the UN Security Council resolutions, and only after months and months of negotiations did we realize that wasn't going to happen. No, that's not what happened.
Yes.
What happened is we never even pursued it.
Yes. The Washington Institute has a fabulous reputation for being a think tank that addresses a whole host of issues relating to, in this instance, the Middle East. What are the global consequences from your perspective, Robert? The global consequences of this deal that go beyond the limited question of, as important as it is, will Iran become a nuclear weaponized state? This deal does change the dynamic in the Middle East. Speak to that for one moment.
Well, this is the area that is of most concern and driving most of the anxiety. Not all of it, of course, but most of it. And the idea here is, even under international sanctions, even under sanctions that are allegedly drying up their economy and forcing them to make very tough choices between even in this situation, the Iranians are scraping enough money to keep Assad afloat in Syria, to attempt to take over Yemen, to extend their influence throughout Iraq, to do subversion throughout the Gulf, and to fund the most radical Palestinian terrorist groups, and even to pay for a little terrorism here in our nation's capital in Washington, D.C. Now, if that's what they're able to do when they're in the poorhouse, so this argument goes, just imagine what they'll be able to do when they hit the lottery and, a substantial, perhaps more than $100 billion of sanctions relief, plus the, over a period of time, the added revenue from oil and all these sorts of things begins flowing into their coffers. Now, I'm perfectly willing to accept the idea that the vast majority of this sanctions relief money will go to civilian spending. But even if 10 or 20% of it is diverted for nefarious activities, illicit activities, spreading Iran's message around the Middle East, that is an enormous sum.
Of course,
we're looking at let's just say $15 to $20 billion. They only give Assad $2 billion a year. With $20 billion, the Iranians can do all sorts of asymmetric, terrifying things that put our allies, that put Jews, that put Israelis, that put Americans, that put our allies throughout the Middle East, that put them at risk.
Yes.
So I think this idea is driving our partners in the Middle East, both Arabs and Israelis, up a wall.
Robert, it is always wonderful to get your insight and your analysis. And anytime you say to me, I don't answer that kind of question, you're always right to say it as well. But you're wonderful, and you always give me time is something very precious to me. So thank you very much. You continue your wonderful work, and we'll call you often.
Happy to speak with you.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Take
care. Bye-bye.
Robert Satloff, who, of course, is the executive director of the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, and he's doing fabulous work in Washington. And another individual who is doing some of the best work in the Jewish world today is the executive director of the American Jewish Committee, David Harris, who joins us now on the phone. David, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, Mark.
David, what was your reaction? What is your reaction to this deal between Iran and the American administration and the P5+1?
First, and we've discussed this on many occasions on your television station, Mark, this did not come as a big surprise to us. It was very clear to us in recent years that this was the top foreign policy priority of the United States. Washington wanted a deal. Our partners, with the occasional exception of the French, went along. They, too, wanted a deal. So the only risk was whether Iran would interpret our enthusiasm in such a way that they would overplay their hand. So in the end, we have a deal. And our view is that this is among the most consequential decisions in a generation.
Yes.
And therefore, the U.S. Congress, which has assigned itself a role over the next 60 days, has arguably the single most important challenge for legislators, and that is to thoroughly review, debate, discuss, probe, question, investigate, and ultimately decide what to do. And we count on those legislators to do exactly that and to put aside other extraneous issues and look at this issue through one central question. Does this deal enhance the national security interests of the United States and our key allies in the Middle East or not? If it does, it's one conclusion. But if it doesn't, it's another conclusion.
Do you have an opinion on that question?
We're still trying to get through the 159 pages of really dense text. And by dense, I don't just mean lots of words, but lots of possibilities for understanding, interpretation. We've been talking with a variety of officials in Washington and elsewhere, because we believe that if we're asking members of Congress to spend the time, then we need to spend the time. I mean, obviously, our starting position, Mark, is, we know something about the Iranian regime. This is not Switzerland or Sweden. This is a regime that has been deceitful, deceptive, dangerous, disruptive, destabilizing in every way imaginable in its neighborhood, toward Israel, here in the United States, even in Latin America. So we begin with a healthy dose of skepticism about whether such a deal is possible. But the president has said this is not a deal based on trust. We're not asking anyone to trust Iran. This is a deal, he said, based on verification. And we need to understand for ourselves whether the methodology of verification is such that we can feel any degree of confidence. But one final point, Mark. We need to understand that this is not just about the deal itself. The deal has a timeline, whether it's 10 years, 12 years, or 15 years. It's about what happens as a result of the deal in the neighboring countries. What do the Sunni Arab countries do? What does Israel do in response? Because their opposition is well known. What happens when the deal ends? Have we validated Iran as a nuclear threshold state with essentially little or no breakout time to becoming a nuclear power? So there are lots and lots and lots of questions, and for the moment we're looking for the answers.
Okay. To some degree, David, your questions imply an answer, it seems to me. The discussion, as I've watched it now in the Jewish community, it's only been a few days. But as the discussion emerges, as you read what people are writing, mostly against it and sometimes in favor of the deal, one pivotal question is, has this only delayed the inevitable, namely Iran will have at some point nuclear weapon capability? Or, as the president said in his interview, when his press conference and his interview with Thomas Friedman, we have prevented Iran from becoming a nuclear weapons state. It doesn't seem to many that anything has been prevented. At best, there's been a delay, and one can hope that during the years of the delay, whether they're 10, 12, 15, maybe more, that either there will be a regime change in Iran or that Iran will come to simply evolve into a different kind of government with a different kind of agenda. But as you describe Iran, which is what we understand it to be, a major sponsor of worldwide terrorism, anti-Israel, anti-West, it doesn't seem like there's a likelihood for a major change of perspective in the next dozen to 15 years. So while you're saying it in a very respectful way, you want to look at it, you want to study it, you don't know yet, it seems to me, David, that there is an instinctive feeling within the AJC that this was not a good deal. And if I'm overstating it, I want you to correct me.
No, I think, Mark, you're saying something very important. As I said earlier, we begin with a healthy dose of skepticism before we're dealing with Iran. Again, we know something about Iranian behavior. AJC has been following this issue for more than 15 years, Mark. We have traveled to every major capital in the world many times. We have had literally thousands of meetings on the Iran nuclear issue, from Washington to Beijing and from Tokyo to Paris, and just keep circling the globe. We also understand that this deal is limited in nature, not just in terms of time, but also in terms of scope. There are many issues it doesn't appear to touch. Iran's behavior in Yemen, in Lebanon, its support for Hezbollah and Hamas, its missile program, Americans who are held hostage there, the unresolved issues of the Amia bombing in Buenos Aires, for which Iran has been held responsible for many years now. I can go down a much longer list, but I do think Mark, that in addressing this issue, and here I think there is one fair question that is being asked by the White House that needs to be considered by those who have doubts. And that question is, what is the alternative?
Mm-hmm.
And, it's easy if you're out of government to simply attack a policy.
Yes.
Believe me, I understand it. I've done it more than once. But the question that is then asked is, okay, follow this path. If indeed the Congress rejects the deal and overrides the president's already announced intention to veto, then what happens in the next phase? Does that mean that we then go to war with Iran? Does it mean that Israel attacks Iran? Does it mean that we try and impose a new sanctions regime and re-enlist the support of the Russians, the Chinese, the Germans, the British, the French, the UN Security Council? I'm saying this not because I've been sold on the deal. Don't misunderstand me. That's not the issue at all. But I do think that responsible people in this discussion, and AJC considers itself a responsible participant, also need to grapple with the question of, if not this deal,
Mm-hmm.
what is likely to happen?
Mm-hmm.
And that's not a simple question to answer. So yes, we're skeptical, you bet. Do we understand the Iranian regime? Yes. Frankly, my first instinct, Mark, is, when I think about this deal, is to think about, of all people, Groucho Marx.
Yes.
Because Groucho Marx famously said, I would never be a member of a club that would have me as a member.
Yes.
And I could take the same approach to the deal and say I would never want to be party to a deal that this Iranian regime would be party to.
Mm-hmm.
Because almost by definition, you wonder, how are they deceiving you? How are they cheating you? How are they interpreting the language differently than you are? There are a lot of surprises coming. There's no question in my mind. But I also have to ask, as a responsible organization, if we oppose this deal, and we'll know in a couple of days, but if we oppose this deal, we also have to be prepared to answer the question, okay, then, what's the alternative? And
Good
that's
for
not
you.
a simple proposition either.
Absolutely. Good for you, David. So look, David, after you've had a little bit more time to look at it, again, I repeat, we're only a days into this entire debate and discussion. Let me come back and you'll tell me where you stand. Is that fair enough?
With great pleasure.
David, you're doing fabulous work. You know what I feel about you. And thank you so much. And thank you always for being, there for me when I need you. We'll call you in a couple days, next week, whatever, and we'll see where you stand there. But thank you. Very thoughtful comments. I appreciate it.
I'll look forward to it, Mark.
Thank you very, very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. David Harris, the Executive Director of the American Jewish Committee. Look, the issue is more nuanced and complicated than simply, the sky is falling, or look what a great deal we made. And what you're seeing in the Jewish world is some real serious analysis. And what I hope to do here on JBS is make sure we follow that analysis and bring as much of it to you as we possibly can. My thanks, as always, to our director, Sloan Copeland, production coordinator, Serge Goldberg, the associate director of JBS, Dara Golub, and to the producers of this edition of In the News, Carol Lilienthal and Ron Jacobson. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.